Hello, everyone. We'll start in just a second. Okay, let's get started. Thank you and good day for coming to the OCLC LIBER Open Science Discussion Series. This is our final wrap-up or roundup of the findings from our small group discussions that we've had over the last few weeks. I am Rachel Frick. I am Executive Director of the OCLC Research Library Partnership. I'm here along with my fellow colleague, Astrid Vernhuizen, who's the Executive Director of LIBER, along with the Senior Program Officers, T.C. Vanderwerf and Rebecca Bryant. So thank you again for joining us today. Just going to go over a few housekeeping details before we get started into the core of our discussion. Your microphone is muted during this webinar, but if you have any questions or comments, please make sure you share them in the chat and look for the everyone option. And that way we get the messages, both the panelists and the participants. We will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar, and we will pull the questions from the chat at that time. If you experience any technical difficulties, please contact the WebEx host via the chat. Look for the host option in the drop-down menu of who to select the message to. Our webinar today will be recorded, and it will be published on our event website along with a copy of the slides. Here's just more information about our panel, just to remind people to post to everyone. And there we go. Once again, we'll be recording this webinar, and thank you for joining us. So let's get started. Today's webinar is organized jointly by LIBER and OCLC Research Library Partnership. As some of you know, LIBER is comprised of over 450 national, university, and research libraries, and for nearly 50 years has worked as a coalition to meet the mission of enabling world-class research. The OCLC Research Library Partnership is a transnational network of more than 130 research libraries, offering extensive professional development opportunities for library staff and connecting libraries to influence OCLC research and OCLC work in general. So we're really happy to collaborate together on this discussion series. This webinar is the final session of the discussion series, rounding up a series of small group discussions that were held in the month of October. These discussions built upon the LIBER Open Science Roadmap and encouraged participants to create a bold vision of the ideal future state of open science ecosystem, the challenges obstructing the achievement of this vision, and the opportunities for collective action with relevant communities. The small groups were organized around the 7 focus areas listed here, which were described in detail in the LIBER Roadmap. So when we came together, LIBER and OCLC Research Library Partnership, the objectives and desired outcomes of the discussion series was to offer our networks a forum for meaningful discussions and offer an opportunity to exchange ideas across the Atlantic as we brought together our 2 networks with audience from both Europe and North America, and to identify key research questions that LIBER, in cooperation with OCLC, can address to advance the role of research libraries in an emerging open science landscape. We really hoped that this cross-pollination of our communities would foster alignment of longer-term views and approaches. We were really excited about the results of this discussion series because, as you know, moving to virtual is new for a lot of us. We had great participation. We had over 53 attendees from 18 countries, and we got a lot of positive feedback about these meaningful discussions, the participatory nature of the engagement, and the stimulating conversation that we had. Participants felt that the discussions were meaningful, that they liked the interactive, participatory, and caring nature of them, And all in all, they found the conversations extremely stimulating. We had between 9 and 14 attendees per session, and it turned out to be a really great number for deep discussions reflecting everyone's viewpoints and opinions. Participants also appreciated the diversity of the group with multiple voices and different opinions across continents. They liked the free format of discussions and the structures in 3 parts with some polling to help us guide the conversation when we're together. If you did not attend any of these discussions, there's summaries of each of these particular discussion series that were shared via our blog post on Hanging Together, and the link is right there, hangingtogether.org. What we found interesting and what we're going to share with you in more detail today is that we found certain ideas, issues, and solutions came up repeatedly during the discussions and seemed relevant across the board. We felt that taken together, these discussions yielded more, and we wanted to synthesize the findings and present those results to you today. So what follows is a discussion of our findings, the consolidation, and we'll present these in the order of the 3 main questions that we offered in the discussions. Those questions were, what does an ideal future state look like? What are the main challenges and obstacles? And how can the library and other communities take collective action to address these challenges? And with that, I'm going to hand things over to Astrid. She's going to talk to you about the future state. Astrid?
Thank you, Rachel. So, in the first part of each session, the participants were allowed to fantasize about an ideal future. The question we asked was, what does a perfect future state look like for the open science ecosystem? What if there were no obstacles at all, and you could shape the future yourself? Participants were allowed to just imagine, the most fun part of the sessions. And as Rachel explained, we were using the 7 focus areas of the LIBER Open Science Roadmap. So just imagine, we have tried to combine all fantasies of each participant in the discussions and created a total picture of this perfect future. The fantasies were very unanimous and led to a very cheerful image. This picture seems to give a good idea of the outlined future. The first thing that stands out is that people stand close together, so no more COVID, and they all look happy. All research and all science is open, no more locks, and everyone can access everything. On the right side, you see that everybody is working together. Citizens, students, companies, and researchers, they all work hand in hand to make research and society better. So to summarize the discussions, in a perfect future, culture has changed. All research processes are open, transparent, and inclusive. Infrastructure, services, and data are interoperable and accessible. Libraries have all necessary skills, and new methods are in place for metrics and rewards. And libraries will cooperate with everyone. It looks like a very nice future. As the discussions went on this perfect future state, I had to think of the LIBER strategy for 2018-2022, drawn up in 2017, which described a similar future, with open access, fair data, and all necessary skills and infrastructures. Although this vision presents a similar vision as the one from the discussions, I think the participants in our discussions saw the future even more beautiful and even more open than LIBER could have imagined in 2017. So let's take a closer look at some of those images about the future. In the kickoff session of this series, both keynote speakers, Janet Fry and Rachel, spoke of the need for a revolution, one which opens up research processes and changes mindsets in favor of a world where policies, tools, and infrastructures support the growth and sharing of knowledge. In the future described by our participants, this cultural change has already taken place. Openness is central and will be the focus, and so all research processes are open as well, transparent and inclusive. Open science values have become a new normal, and the open science language is adopted by everyone. As one of the participants said, it's really important to realize the words we are using now are not common language for everyone. Students and researchers will understand what open science means in practice for them in the future. Last but not least, in the perfect future, where culture has changed, it's not difficult to imagine that there also will be new types of incentives, metrics and rewards for research. And we kept on imagining. So in the ideal future state, all infrastructure, services, and data are interoperable and accessible. Research will be data-driven, and there are robust infrastructures for storing, sharing, processing, and preserving data. Infrastructures are globally interconnected and integrated, also to avoid duplications, and are leading to an internet of fair data and services. Software, all data are easily available to both humans and machines. Metadata standards are all fair and ensure semantic interoperability. And we kept on imagining. In the ideal state, librarians would have all necessary skills. Open science and FAIR principles are embedded in the skills librarians have. So they will not only have soft skills to be able to walk in the shoes of researchers, students, and citizens, but they will also have hard skills to support and educate researchers as they use a lot of digital methods and digital tools. So librarians will also know the basics of software programming, tools, and data science. With all these skills in place, of course, there will be a balanced distribution of labor between data scientists and researchers. And also, of course, with all these skills in place, the library is the place to go for data services. An important aspect that was mentioned in all discussions is cooperation. In the future, research libraries will work together with just about everyone. We will come back to this later in the session, but participants were sure that in the future libraries would work closely together with researchers, citizens, public libraries, vendors, publishers, policymakers, and so on. The researchers will be central, but all stakeholders will work together instead of competing. There will be research collaborations across different institutions and different research areas. And libraries will accommodate all regions everywhere. The basis is co-creation. The researchers will be involved early on in all design processes. So this was about the future state, and so much for the fun part of this afternoon. It was a great pleasure to fantasize with all participants about this perfect future, and also to see that we were very much in agreement about how this future looks like. Now comes the more complicated part of this afternoon, and I would like to give the floor to Titia van der Werf to talk about the challenges to reach this ideal future.
Thank you, Astrid. let's go to the next part. Now that we have a sense of what the future state of the open science ecosystem ideally looks like, the next question was, what are the main obstacles preventing progress towards achieving this dream? We used real-time online polling to brainstorm a list of obstacles, barriers, and challenges. Participants could enter as many obstacles as they could imagine or think of, and then vote for the top 3 obstacles. This was a very efficient way of collecting what is top of mind for the participants and to rapidly gain consensus on the 3 top items. Some of the obstacles were closely overlapping, as you can see from this example from the session on skills. The numbers 5, 11, and 14 are obstacles alluding to the hierarchical differences between the position of a librarian and a researcher, each time worded a little bit differently, but the gist is the same. So this was an overlap within one session, but across the 7 sessions that we held, we saw even more overlap. So what we did is bundle the overlapping obstacles into categories. Taking just the topmost obstacles, the ones that received most votes in the different sessions, this bundling exercise resulted in 5 categories of obstacles, which you see listed here. Next, I will shortly describe the main characteristics of each of these 5 categories as discussed during the 7 sessions. So let's start with culture change. A shift to open science requires change at many levels of the ecosystem, but 3 themes were predominant. First, the need for change in attitudes. The attitudes of both librarians and researchers is holding us back from making progress. Librarians tend to be risk-avoiding and in a waiting mode, and senior researchers and senior administrators, who are the ones who set the tone, if they don't embrace open science, then it becomes very difficult to move forward. Another dominant theme was lack of collaboration. There is still too little connection between librarians and researchers. The different campus units are siloed, and the different stakeholders have different perspectives on open, which also makes communication and collaboration hard to do. Finally, it was also clear to all of us that it's also about an even bigger culture change, not just embracing open science principles, but practicing openness more generally, more widely, in science, in government, in society, in each individual's day-to-day lives. Inadequate rewards and incentives came up repeatedly as a major roadblock. Researchers lack sufficient incentives to take open science seriously. The old metrics and reward system is still in place, and it does not reward open science activities. Many of these activities, like data management plans or research data management, don't directly result in a book or the publication of an article. So the other stuff is not measured, nor is it supported, and it is based on unpaid and unrecognized labor. More fundamentally, it was thought that the competitive nature of the metrics and reward system was also a root cause of the problem. The top university league tables and rankings and similar tools all contribute to making competition more important than ethics. The lack of researcher involvement in open science is directly related to the inadequate rewards and incentives. This lack of involvement was felt as a major barrier, and it could take different forms: lack of awareness, uncertainty of what open science means in practice, lack of knowledge about research integrity and ethics. Lack of involvement also happens when top-down initiatives fail to involve researchers in co-creation or co-designing the open science environment. The European Open Science Cloud was given as an example of this, and participants in this session about the EOSC expressed their concerns about this. Finally, the big divide between open science advocacy and the day-to-day research work was mentioned. For researchers, open science in practice means yet another thing we need to do. These are two quotes from the sessions that illustrate the points from the previous slide. One participant was concerned about young researchers who have one foot in the new world and one foot in the old world. She said younger researchers are more involved in open science, but they are more at risk of being caught in the trap of predatory practices, for example, predatory journals. They are less aware of the huge problems about integrity. And the second quote is from another participant who mentioned a survey conducted at a US university, which revealed that most respondents were burned out on the research assessment practice and faced mental health risks. Having to report outputs multiple times, again and again, in different systems is a burden for researchers. They are pretty burned out. There are mental health issues with this. The fourth main obstacle is lack of skills. This is about the lack of skills relating to open science, both in librarianship and in academia and higher education. But the discussions actually focused on the librarians. And I'm sharing with you a small excerpt from a conversation that we had discussing what are the most important skills that librarians lack. So one of the participants said, connecting to researchers is one of the most important skills librarians have to learn. Get out there, go to researchers, don't stay behind your bookcase. If we stay in our library, nothing will happen. And another participant agreed. He said, and I think also that researchers want to talk with people who understand what they do. Not every librarian needs to be an excellent programmer or data scientist, but to be a good person to speak with, to make connections, they need to know at least the basics of these hard skills. Another discussion point was the fact, wait, I'll just go back because I forgot that, was the fact that the necessary skills are not integrated in academic curricula. So they're not included in library school curriculum, for example. So last but not least, another main obstacle that surfaced at the top was the lack of standards and interoperability. The whole open science infrastructure is still a patchwork of old and new technologies, of open and proprietary systems. And what is most concerning is that there is no agreement around which standards to back, and that different stakeholders are developing different solutions. Persistent identifiers are crucial for disambiguation and for resolving two locations, but they are often not supported by information systems such as institutional repositories or library discovery systems. No open metadata. One of the participants cried out, why is it that in the 2020s, metadata is still locked and made proprietary? Open citations, open abstracts, DOIs with full metadata are essential. So participants felt that all these issues together contribute to an environment that is not seamlessly integrated and not user-friendly. And this in turn adds to researchers' current frustration with doing open science. Well, talking about problems is always easier than coming up with good solutions. But we did make sure that we allowed much time for discussing the third question, which was about how can the library and other communities take collective action to address these challenges and obstacles. For this, I will hand over to Rebecca.
Hi, and so let's talk a little bit about the challenges of getting there. So some observations on sort of the tone of the discussion. One of the things that those of us at OCLC and LIBER noticed was this was harder for us to imagine. It wasn't hard for us to imagine the ideal state, or it wasn't hard to name the challenges, but it was much harder for us to ideate how we act to get to this future. We also heard from some frustration in the tone of people. And we noticed that a lot of the discussions, even though we tried to guide it about collective action, many of the discussions still focused on local, or what I'll call below the institution efforts, things that were happening in your library, on your campus, rather than things that might be happening at like a national level or an international level. However, we did repeatedly hear, while the discussion was focused on these below the institution efforts, we still heard this need to work beyond the library, that the library couldn't do it alone. And we're left sort of wondering, well, maybe we're all a little uncomfortable with this, and we also don't know how to do it. And left sort of also realizing that, you know, if this were easy, we would have done it already, and that open science is really quite difficult. Another observation I have here is that, you know, Tizia went through these sorts of main themes: culture change, lack of researcher involvement, standards, interoperability, and skills. But even though there are 5 categories, and culture change is one of them, culture change is also still the umbrella over all of them. It requires culture change to make all of these other 4 things happen: researcher involvement, library skills, interoperability, and metrics and rewards. So I'm going to focus most of my comments here on this issue of culture change, and then very quickly, you know, sort of conclude with a little bit on the other things, because we feel like culture change is the most important part of this conversation. And also really emphasizing that while the library really values as such an important stakeholder in open science, open science is an enterprise task. It requires engagement from lots of stakeholders, and that the library cannot do this alone. So I'm going to focus my thoughts a little bit here, talking, you know, sort of dividing up sort of stakeholder groups, if you will. On the left here, I think we can talk about the decision makers or the stakeholders, and also the researchers. And I want to treat these separately. The researchers, of course, are such an important stakeholder group, but I think that it's useful to sort of think about working with them separately. So I'm going to set them aside for now and talk about the decision makers and others who may be part of this culture change. I'm also then going to divide that group into sort of those working on your campus, at your institution, who are, you know, sort of below the institution, and then also those above the institution. And I'm going to talk first about those who are within or below the institution. And my thoughts here, what I'm going to be talking about, also relate to a recent publication that I was a co-author on at OCLC called Social Interoperability and Research Support, Cross-Campus Partnerships and the University Research Enterprise. This was just published a couple months ago. And in this, we talked about all of those stakeholders in providing research support, including open science, you know, research data management, CRIS systems or RIM systems, metrics, research analytics, and more, ORCID adoption. So, you know, all of these sorts of things that fit into supporting the open science ecosystem. we talked about who a lot of these campus stakeholders are, and we came up with this conceptual model for, really primary types of stakeholders, which of course, as you see, includes the library, but emphasizes some other stakeholders as well. Our report is actually available open access, and so you can access it at the link here. And so what we've sort of done is thinking about, some of the comments we got from preparing that report, where we actually interviewed a lot of non-library stakeholders, and also combining them here with the quotes you see here, which were from the discussions we've had in the last month through this discussion series. And so we heard, like in this blue box here, is that we need to collaborate with the deans, provost, associate deans council. So collaborate with those folks in academic affairs. We need to collaborate with the research office. So we have one person participating saying, oh yes, we have librarians who are actually funded by the research office at our institution. And we also heard that at TU Delft, the Science Center supports researchers to help them translate their research so that it's understandable for lay people. And that's sort of part of this communication function that others on campus can help support us with. These are all important stakeholders, and part of what we talk about as social interoperability, and this is something I've been noticing for a long time, is that I would go to a conference, you'd hear a really interesting presentation on technical interoperability, or how we're sort of moving forward with a new repository or a new issue, and then like in the last 5 minutes or something, we'd have this sort of recognition that, yes, there's the social part, the social stuff. And that's why we're trying to move this beyond social stuff to say this is social interoperability. It's the yin and yang with technical interoperability, and to have success moving things forward, you have to have both. And we define social interoperability as the creation and maintenance of working relationships across individuals and organizational units that promote collaboration, communication, and mutual understanding. And my co-authors and I would suggest that you must have the social interoperability below the institution and above the institution to forward research support generally and open science specifically. So I've talked a little bit, and there's much more that I've also written related to below the institution. The stakeholders above the institution are also absolutely critical for libraries to partner with in order to forward open science. And these include these folks here on the left side, the funders, national policymakers, persistent identifier providers, the publishing community, other service providers, open science communities like EOSC or the Research Data Alliance, as well as the citizens and the public libraries that can help connect us with the citizens as well. And so we heard in our discussions in the last month is that it's really important is to look at the funding agencies. They are the ones that do the assessment. They have a very important role in changing things quickly. And others suggested it's really important to work with parties that work with innovation, RDA groups, GoFair, and EOSC. We heard comments that it's really important that culture change starts with us in the library community. So we heard folks in our discussion in the last month say, we can broker relationships, and that's underrelated. And we need to be a single point of contact to bring libraries and researchers together. This is also something we heard in the research project I worked on recently. And we heard very often that the library was a valued, trusted, and seen as an agnostic party on campus, and was valued for its expertise in copyright, metadata, journal licensing, knowledge about predatory journals, open access, and more. So there's a lot of value that the library offers. However, we also heard some other things in our research study from our non-library stakeholders that maybe offers us opportunities for reflection. Some of the things we heard was that there could be an overemphasis on values to then the neglect of of understanding what the other party was trying to solve, which also might offer us ways to communicate more effectively to get towards our values. And we heard this actually in our discussion. You see here in the pink box is that someone in the discussion the last month said, maybe we are a bit brutal to them when it comes to our mission and we want to skill them. That might be a bit frightening, perhaps even intimidating. It's about soft skills and political skills here. And someone else said the library can be a neutral actor. We can be seen as being helpful rather than saying you have to do open science. Other things we heard, going back to my past research study, is that services and value proposition can be diluted at libraries by them trying to do too much or be everything to everyone. That libraries might be seen as slower than other parts of campus, slower than the research, not working at the same pace as the researchers. And also we often heard sort of about this lack of confidence sometimes about librarians, not feeling like they were full partners, not feeling like they were treated as full partners certainly, and perhaps having some sort of imposter syndrome, whereas our informants sort of said, yes, but we really value what libraries have. We just want them to be more confident about it. We value that. They just need to own it. And also some discomfort also with finance and finance concerns. So some of the things we also talked about in this report that I think that are valuable related to this discussion is how we can move forward and how we can impact that culture change through social interoperability. And here in the middle of the sort of the figure are a lot of these things, such as securing buy-in and speaking a language, leveraging shared staff, being confident in your value. And we heard comments in the discussion in the last month that echoed many of these things. For instance, in the UK, instead of using the term open science, there's an attempt to call it open research, so that humanities and social sciences don't feel excluded, because a term like open science suggests, well, it's not about me, when really I think we all intend that it is. And also, again, this quote about, we have librarians who are funded by the research office, and that we want to promote the library as the place to go and to have confidence in that value. Okay, so I've talked a lot about the culture change with all the stakeholders who aren't the researchers. Let's talk just briefly about the researchers. We heard the comment, we need to make open easy, and we're not currently making it easy. And that'll come back also, I think, about the infrastructure and the PIDs. But we often heard that we need more outreach to early career researchers. We did also hear discussion about integration of libraries into interdisciplinary research teams. Liaison librarians should become a more integral part of the research team. If they were more embedded, I think they can do a better job facilitating conversations about research integrity. We have an interesting case study that at OCLC and the Research Library Partnership recently have a recorded webinar from the University of Miami that talks about what they've done there. And maybe somebody from OCLC could put a link to that in the chat, because I think that that's also about ways that the library is seen as a more full partner. And also library values are, and library skills enable open science in that way. Moving quickly on to incentives, it's important to work both above and below the institution. And here were some examples of that. In the pink box, in the Netherlands, they're setting up a system at the national level for rewarding researchers for making data available, saying you need both top-down and bottom-up incentives. And another person said, the challenge is moving the funding conversations out of the library and into the broader institutional setting. In thinking about incentives, metrics, rewards, it's important that this isn't a library-only conversation, that it's the library as well as others on the campus and others in the funding and research community having those conversations. Now, on an earlier slide, I had this quote about we need to make open easy. And TC also talked about sort of the burden on researchers. A lot of the conversations focused on the needs for standards and interoperability, that those are the part of our pathway to making open much easy. But someone also said we need to build PIDs into all of our systems, and we need to practice what we preach. We also have the opportunity to advocate for PIDs and to also get around the existing PIDs like DOIs, like ORCID IDs, and to help support them so that they reach potential, they reach their full maturity, and build these all into our systems. Here in the lower right, you also see ways that LIBER and OCLC are also working. LIBER is working in partnership with SSHOC to shape and support European open science infrastructure. And OCLC is also working to help surface open access and broader open content within its discovery, so that it's much easier for people not only to search for and discover open content, but also to be immediately connected with it. Just another slide or two, and then we're going to get to the discussion. We talked about skills, and I think an important part of our skills discussion was that it's both about the technical skills, the metadata skills, the data support skills, but also the soft skills that can help broker those relationships as well. And that maybe also that having skills, and having skills especially at the disciplinary levels, is really, no one can maybe have all of those skills. And that it's really important that we pool our skills, such as could we develop coordinated specializations within groups of libraries, specifically related to maybe research data management and FAIR data. We had some examples from Canada and the United States related to this, and so I think that there also are opportunities for continued community growth in this area. So wrapping up, in our kickoff, and in the LIBER roadmap, it stated that a revolution is required that opens up research processes and changes mindsets in favor of a world where policies, tools, and infrastructures universally support the growth and sharing of knowledge. One thing I think that we are coming away from with this discussion series is realizing that to get to the revolution, it's also really very much an evolution. That it's a slow process. It's one that takes lots of people involved, lots of people at the table, but it's still a revolution, but that it's also about lots of tiny steps, all of us taking together. So it's both revolution and evolution. And that concludes my discussion. I think we have some time for Q&A, and Rachel, I think, is going to lead that.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yes, we do have a little bit of time for questions. There were a few questions in the chat, and I'm going to also seek some guidance from my fellow panelists to make sure that we've pulled most of the questions out. There was a couple mentions about competition being a barrier to this open state, this future open state. And I know we mentioned it briefly in passing, but I wanted to consult my panelists, Rebecca, Titia, and Astrid, just some of the nature of the conversation we had about competition in the small discussion groups.
Yeah, let me take that question, Rachel. Because I was at that session, and I remember very well that it was one of the top 3 challenges of that session was actually called prestige over ethics. And then we had a discussion of what do we mean exactly by prestige. And then there was one participant who said, well, I disagree with the word prestige because prestige is something that actually is like the motor, it drives science. society finds science very important, so it's the prestige is good, but it's when competition becomes too hard, when it becomes too central to the whole scientific enterprise, that then it starts having bad connotations and bad effects. So we changed the prestige into competition because we thought that that was the real problem. So I hope that clarifies it a little bit.
Rebecca?
Nothing else for me. I think Titia sort of covered that well.
Astrid, do you have anything else to add?
Oh, nothing from my side.
Okay. There was another question about, there was one about balanced distribution of labor, and that was mentioned in the ideal state. And can we say how we tell what is balanced? That was a question in the chat. And so I'm going to actually, once again, pass it back to our panelists. What is that? How do we recognize when the labor has been distributed?
Yeah, so there was a discussion about either having more data scientists as to support the researchers, while another opinion was that there should be no more data scientists, as infrastructures and services should be easily accessible. So researchers should be able to handle themselves, those infrastructures and services. So the discussion was not really solved, but looking at an ideal future, there was an idea that balance should be there. So there should be a right balance between the work that researchers have to do to handle this burnout, that Titia was mentioned, and the data science that help them with that.
Anything else to add from my panelists? Okay. Yeah, I think that skill around data management, maybe we don't have enough professional support for that skill yet, so that labor is being distributed or added to existing professional roles, and that's inhibiting the balance. But that would go. All right. There was a question about funding and, where is this, the funding, what is the role of the funders, how does fundraising and supporting science, how does that affect open science?
I can start with that. I think that it would be interesting to have more conversations directly with funders about this, to sort of see about how they might think we could really help them. Because, and also just acknowledging that this landscape looks really different in different places. From my position here in the United States, there are some national funders that are driving open science data sharing type activities, but in, I would generally say, sort of a softer way than in many parts of Europe. And so it's also often at the national level, like in the US and Canada, versus, at the regional level in Europe. My sense is that a lot of this is that there's a lot that the funders can really do, and to help make things happen much faster than we can otherwise it's at the one researcher at a time effort. And this was certainly true, when you see like things like adoption of ORCID, is that if I remember working for ORCID, and at the time that like the Portuguese government said, oh, we want everybody to have an ORCID and to tie it into their Scopus ID, and we're just looking at the data saying, oh my gosh, what's with Portugal? Because we didn't even know this had happened. And suddenly you've got sort of that mandate that sort of can help drive that. So all sorts of things in that landscape that are very interesting and are reasons to, I think, deepen our relationships between our organizations and with the funders. And I know that those are things that LIBER is also doing across Europe as well.
And I guess to add to this as well is the importance of involving the researchers themselves in this whole, collaboration, communication with funding agencies. Otherwise, it's perceived as a top-down measure, and often the incentives that are built in this measure are not the right incentives. So often, it's much better to just do this together with those who are involved, and those are the researchers. And often you don't see them being or getting them involved, which has been talked about during these sessions also quite a bit.
Astrid, do you have something to add?
Just only to name an example, I think Coalition S is a good example of funders working together with researchers, libraries, as to take care of open access. So I think that's a very good example for this question, where working together with funders really helps.
Rebecca, there was a follow-up question for you, and I think somebody else answered it in the chat. Oh, you answered it. There we go. Do you want to go a little deeper on that question?
Yeah, I'll just say sort of related to our model, of sort of the below the institution stakeholders and partners, is that we tried to keep it simple. Also, because no two institutions look alike, but research administration is the one that I think can get the most sort of cloudy, because of what you might call it. Like in the U.S., we say research administration, but that actually really just might mean the people who are processing, and doing the grants administration. But we also wanted that to be inclusive of proposal development, support for maybe institutes at the institution, and leadership related to research. So it's really sort of the whole research office, but acknowledging that it might also not be called that at your institution. So it's all those other folks. And I'll add that in our discussions, and even in discussions I've had past, is that it's the proposal development, and of course, which is much more than that these days, the sort of research development folks, as they're called here in the U.S., who are so keen to partner with the library on all things research support, including open science. And so if there was and who I also find are folks who, well, first of all, many of them I talk with actually have library training, but there's actually seems to be some natural affinities there, but then can open other doors. So that was a real takeaway for me, is that they are a stakeholder group within that sort of research administration group, who are perhaps the easiest to tap and who can open doors to the rest of campus.
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. There was another question in the chat for our panelists. Have we thought, or what came out in the conversations, to make researchers aware that open science might be for them, even though they're not in a scientific discipline? I think there was a little bit of conversation in one of our breakout groups. Astrid, Titia, do you want to take that? Either one of them?
I'm trying to understand the question. So are there ways that discussants thought of to make researchers aware that open science might be for them too, even if they are not in the scientific disciplines? Researchers who are not in the scientific disciplines, I don't understand.
So like the principles around open science, how might they apply to maybe the humanities or other disciplines across campus?
Yeah, well, it seems to me so obvious. But I'm thinking, I know that there has been a lot of stress on this fact that, we need to make sure that the humanities and the social sciences are included in this whole discussion. And the example that Rebecca was giving about in the UK, that they are tending to talk not about open science but open research, exactly for that reason, to make the humanities scholars aware of, this is also something for you and not just for the hard sciences. So apparently it's not obvious, and it's something that people in the library are very aware of. So it was certainly one of the themes that has been discussed.
Yeah, I will say I find the language, as somebody who's trained as a humanist, I find the language exclusionary. It's not ideal. I also know that the language came from folks who were focused on science. And so it's sort of, there's just, I think, some work to do, like was mentioned in the UK, about recognizing that the values of openness cut across all disciplines.
Astrid, I see you nodding. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, no, because I think this question is more or less a threat to all the discussions that we had. So in every question, a lot of it came down to connecting to all researchers. So I think, this question really hits the point from our discussions.
Exactly. I think it goes back to what we were talking about, culture change, right? And those small changes in behavior for all of us, and how we talk about things, and how to, be that inclusive force and being that connector and that broker of relationships. Well, our time is slowly coming to an end, so I'm going to conclude with this. Thank you for all the questions. There was one question about library schools, which we will include an answer to that when we do a wrap-up. So thank you for those great conversations in chat. And just a little bit about our next steps. We'll be presenting our results at the CNI Fall 2020 meeting on the 10th of November. So if you have an opportunity to tune into that, please join us for a little bit further conversations about our findings of our discussion series. We're going to be publishing these slides as well as a recording of this webinar on our hangingtogether.org blog and other areas on the OCLC Research and LIBER web pages. For us at OCLC Research and at LIBER, we're going to continue our synthesis of the discussions as well as publishing the outcomes in LIBER Quarterly in the next few months. And we're going to be working with our colleagues together to think about what are those research activities, those program activities, and where we need to focus more around this conversation to move our community forward and think about along those lines as we work towards that ideal future state. I wanted to take a moment to thank so many people that made this successful, not only my fellow panelists today, Rebecca, Titia, and Astrid, as well as our OCLC EMEA host, Renee, her name does not show up, but she has definitely made our work here a lot easier to do. I also want to thank our facilitators of our discussion groups, as well as our invited experts. You'll see them listed here. They also made the work and discussions very invigorating and very exciting, and we couldn't have done it without them. It takes all of us being willing to take the time to have a conversation and examine these issues, and I just want to say thank you for taking the time to spend time with us. And thanks to all of you who joined us today to have this great conversation. We look forward to continuing this and moving forward as we work through, and I just want to say thank you so much, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and look for the follow-up on our many communication channels. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.